I'll never forget the sound of the doorbell that afternoon. It was sharp, insistent, the kind of ring that made the walls of my mansion echo. For a moment, I thought it was just another delivery or a neighbor stopping by. But when I glanced at the screen by the door, I froze. Standing there, almost in a perfect row, were the faces I hadn't seen in 15 years. My family. Not the kind of family you run to and embrace, not the kind you shed tears of joy over seeing again. Number. These were the people who had deliberately erased me from their lives, who had turned family gatherings into a reminder of how unwanted I was. For over a decade, I lived with the echo of their rejection. And now, suddenly, they were on my doorstep. I took a deep breath, straightened my posture, and reached for the handle. My heart didn't race the way I thought it would. Instead, there was a steady calm. I was no longer the fragile daughter they once mocked. I was Amelia Hart. Self-made, independent, successful. The woman they tried to break had risen higher than they could ever imagine. The door creaked open, and there they were, framed against the sunlight. My mother, Linda, with her hair pulled back tightly as if control was her only armor. My father, Richard, stood stiffly beside her, his suit wrinkled, his once proud shoulders slumped. Caleb, my older brother, smirked with the same arrogance he had worn since childhood, though his eyes betrayed unease. And Marissa, my younger sister, stood with her arms folded, looking anywhere but at me, as though she already knew what was coming. "Amelia," my mother said, her voice clipped but laced with forced sweetness. "It's been so long." Her words were meant to sound warm, but I could hear the cracks. Her face had paled, her lips pressed together as though she wasn't sure how I would respond. Caleb chuckled under his breath. Well, well. Looks like our little sister made it big. This place is impressive." His eyes flicked over the marble entryway behind me, the chandelier glowing above. "I guess you've done better than we thought." I didn't smile. I didn't argue. I just looked at them, all of them, and let the silence weigh heavy. They weren't used to me holding power in the conversation. They weren't used to me holding power at all. "You came all this way," I finally said, my voice steady. "But before we go further, let me make one thing clear." I let the words hang, watching their expressions tighten. "This house is mine, and you are no longer a part of it." Marissa's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, then shut it again. My father shifted uncomfortably, muttering something under his breath that I couldn't quite catch. And my mother, her hand clutched at her necklace as if it could anchor her in the moment. Then without another word, I handed them the envelope I had prepared days ago, thick, heavy, official. Their eyes darted down at the papers inside, and I watched the blood rush from their faces as they realized what they were holding. Richard's voice cracked. "What is this?" Caleb's hands trembled slightly as he skimmed the document. His smirk was gone. His jaw clenched, and he staggered back a step. Linda gasped softly, covering her mouth, her composure unraveling for the first time in years. Marissa whispered, almost to herself, "No, this can't be real." It was real, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one shrinking in their presence. They were. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply repeated softly, calmly, the words that had been waiting on my tongue for 15 years. "Welcome to the house you're no longer part of." Their silence was deafening. The family that had once laughed at me, dismissed me, cut me out of every holiday, every reunion, every piece of love and belonging, was now standing in shock, powerless, while I stood tall in the doorway of the life they never thought I could build. That moment, the shock on their faces, the weight of unspoken years between us, was everything I had once dreamed of. But it wasn't revenge. It wasn't triumph. It was clarity. And as they stood there, pale and speechless, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of me finally telling it. When people see me now, they see the mansion, the polished cars, the successful businesswoman who seems to have it all together. They see the marble floors and the glass walls overlooking the city. They see Amelia Hart, CEO, a woman who carved out her empire with her bare hands. What they don't see, what they could never guess, is the pain stitched into every beam of this house. This mansion isn't just where I live. It's proof that I survived being cast out by the very people who should have loved me most. I grew up in a family where love was conditional and respect was scarce. My mother, Linda, believed appearances mattered more than anything. She was the kind of woman who spent more time arranging her pearls in front of the mirror than listening to her children. She had her favorites, and it was no secret who they were. My father, Richard, was her shadow, concerned with reputation, with how the world viewed the Hart family name. To him, I wasn't a daughter. I was an obligation. And then there was Caleb, the eldest, the golden child. He was handed praise and privilege the way other kids got bedtime stories. No matter what he did, whether he excelled or failed, it was celebrated. If Caleb wrecked a car, it was boys will be boys. If I spilled a glass of milk, it was Amelia, why can't you be more careful? He never let me forget that in his eyes, I was beneath him. His smirks, his taunts, his endless reminders that I wasn't wanted. It was like a soundtrack to my childhood. Marissa was different, at least in the beginning. Younger than me by 2 years, she was my shadow for a while. We whispered secrets at night, shared books under the covers, and promised we'd always protect each other. But as we grew older, she chose safety. She chose to follow Linda's lead, to nod and smile in family gatherings while I was pushed to the margins. When the final blow came, the decision to cut me out of family reunions, it was Marissa's silence that hurt the most. She never stood up for me. The first time it happened, I was 23. The annual summer reunion was the biggest event of the year. Cousins, uncles, aunts, everyone gathered at my grandparents' old lake house. I waited for the call, the invite. It never came. When I asked my mother why, she sighed and said, "Amelia, you always bring tension. Maybe it's better if you sit this one out." Those words seared into me like fire. It didn't stop at one summer. It became every holiday, every birthday, every Christmas. They weren't just excluding me, they were erasing me. So I built a new life. I threw myself into my work, into creating something that couldn't be taken away. At first, it was just survival, paying bills, proving I could stand on my own, but survival turned into success. Success turned into power. And with each milestone, each deal signed, each dollar earned, I felt the weight of their absence shift. Their rejection had fueled me more than their acceptance ever could. Still, it left scars. There were nights when the silence of my apartment felt heavier than any insult. Times when I watched other families laughing together and wondered if I'd ever feel that kind of belonging again. But slowly, I realized something vital. I didn't need them to validate me. I didn't need their approval to thrive. And so, when I finally bought the very estate my father had once sworn would never belong to me, it wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was stolen: my dignity, my worth, my right to exist without apology. Standing in my mansion now, surrounded by the things I earned, I am reminded of every time they told me I wouldn't make it. Every time Linda's voice echoed in my head, every time Richard looked through me, every time Caleb laughed at me, every time Marissa chose silence over loyalty. This house is more than wealth. It's a monument to the truth that sometimes family isn't the people you're born into. Sometimes family is yourself, the version of you that refuses to stay broken. So when they rang my doorbell after 15 long years, I wasn't the same Amelia they had abandoned. I wasn't desperate for their approval or aching for their love. I was the woman they created through their cruelty, stronger than they ever imagined, and I was ready to face them. When my family appeared at my mansion door, I knew they weren't there for forgiveness or love. I knew at the moment Caleb's smirk spread across his face and my father avoided looking me in the eye. Old habits don't vanish overnight. The people who erased me from their lives weren't capable of genuine reconciliation, but I let them in anyway, not because I wanted them there, but because I wanted to hear, straight from their mouths, why they had finally come crawling back after 15 years. As they stepped into the foyer, their eyes darted around the marble floors, the sweeping staircase, the chandeliers that glittered like captured stars. For a few moments they were silent, overwhelmed by a world they hadn't expected me to create. Then, Caleb broke it. Of course, it was Caleb. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with the arrogance I remembered all too well. Our little Amelia has done quite well for herself. Who would have thought? I guess exile was the best thing that ever happened to you." He chuckled, as if it were all some great joke. I didn't respond. I just let his words echo in the space between us. My mother, Linda, placed her hand delicately on the banister, her lips tight. "It's a beautiful home," she said softly, almost rehearsed. "You must be very proud." I caught the tremor in her tone. This wasn't admiration. It was envy mixed with desperation. Then my father finally spoke. Richard's voice, once commanding in boardrooms and family dinners, was now subdued. "Amelia," he said, clearing his throat, "we need to talk. Things haven't been easy for us." I raised an eyebrow. For 15 years, things were apparently easy enough without me. What changed? The question lingered, heavy, as silence fell. Marissa, who had been hanging back near the door, finally stepped forward. Her voice was soft, pleading almost. "Please, Amelia, we just want to explain. You deserve to hear it." For a moment, I almost laughed. Now they thought I deserved something? After years of not deserving a seat at the table, not deserving a phone call on my birthday, not deserving even the dignity of acknowledgement? Still, I gave a curt nod. "Go ahead. Explain." Richard glanced at Linda, then back at me. He sighed. "Your mother and we've had some financial difficulties. Investments went bad. The estate, the one your grandfather left us, is in danger. We thought maybe," and there it was. The truth spilled out in a handful of words. Not love, not regret, money. Caleb cut him off, stepping closer, his tone turning sharper. "Look, Amelia, you've got more than enough. You're standing in a palace while the rest of us are drowning. It's only fair that you help your family. You wouldn't even have this drive, this ambition, if not for us." My jaw tightened. "If not for you?" "Caleb, I have this because of you. Because of all of you. Because I had to survive being your scapegoat." His smirk faltered, just slightly, but he pressed on. "Call it what you want. The point is, you can afford to be generous now." Linda chimed in, her voice trembling but coated with the same manipulative sweetness she'd always used. "Amelia, darling, you know blood is thicker than water. Families stick together. We just need some help getting back on our feet." I looked at her, my own mother, who had once told me to sit out of my cousin's wedding because my presence would make things uncomfortable. Now she stood in my home, asking me to bail them out. Marissa's eyes darted between us, tears brimming. "Amelia, please," she whispered. "I know we were wrong. I should have spoken up for you back then, but right now we need you." Her words stung, not because of the plea, but because of the sudden shift. Now she remembered loyalty, when it came tied to desperation. The tension thickened, coiling around us like smoke. They had expected me to crumble, to let old wounds drive me to grasp at their approval. They thought I would cave because some part of me still wanted to belong, but I didn't. Not anymore. "You had 15 years to call, 15 years to knock on my door for something other than money," I said, my voice sharp but calm. "And you chose silence. You chose to erase me, so forgive me if I'm struggling to believe this sudden visit has anything to do with family." Richard shifted, guilt flickering across his face for the first time. Caleb scowled, muttering, "Ungrateful." Linda's eyes darted toward the envelope I had placed on the table, though she didn't yet know what it held. And Marissa, she just stood there, caught between tears and silence. That was the moment I realized what the true conflict was. Not just them showing up, not just their request, but me standing at the edge of a choice, to give in to their demands and relive the cycle of being used, or to hold my ground and show them that Amelia Hart no longer belonged to the girl they once threw away. The room grew colder as I made my decision. The room was thick with silence, broken only by the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. My family stood there, expecting me to fold. For years, that had been the pattern. They pressed, I yielded. They pushed me away. I tried harder to come back. But those days were gone. I looked at them, not as the fragile girl they used to dismiss, but as the woman who had rebuilt herself from the ground up. Their words had once pierced me like daggers, but now they fell harmless, like dull stones clattering at my feet. The choice before me was crystal clear. Either let them use me once again or show them that I had finally outgrown the chains they had wrapped around me. Caleb's voice cut through the air, sharp and insistent. "Come on, Amelia. Stop making this dramatic. Just help us out and we'll move on. You've got the resources. It won't even hurt you." I turned my gaze toward him, steady and unblinking. "Do you hear yourself, Caleb? You cut me out of your life, and now you think you can cut into mine when it's convenient?" He scoffed, shifting his weight. "We're family." The word made my stomach tighten. Family. How easily they wielded it when they needed something. My mother nodded quickly, jumping in. "Yes, Amelia. We made mistakes, but families heal. Families forgive." Her words dripped with a false sincerity that I had heard all my life. The same tone she had used when she told me I wasn't welcome at reunions, when she whispered that I brought unnecessary tension. And yet now, suddenly, forgiveness mattered. I inhaled deeply and let the silence linger for a few seconds. "You're right about one thing," I said finally. "Families do forgive. But tell me, where was that forgiveness when I asked why I was being excluded? Where was that healing when you turned my seat at the table into a vacancy?" No one answered. My father shifted uncomfortably, his eyes trained on the floor. Marissa's lip trembled, her voice breaking. "Amelia, I know it's not fair, but please, don't shut us out like this." Her plea was the closest thing to genuine emotion I had heard that afternoon. For a second, a flicker of the little sister I used to protect tried to tug at my heart. But then I remembered how many times she chose silence over loyalty, how many times she stood by while I was pushed aside. I straightened my shoulders. "I'm not shutting you out, Marissa. You did that to me 15 years ago. I'm simply honoring the choice you all made." They didn't expect that answer. They expected outrage, maybe tears, maybe even begging. Instead, I gave them calm certainty, and that calmness frightened them more than anger ever could. I walked to the side table near the entrance where the envelope had been waiting. I had prepared it days before, almost as if some part of me knew this day would come. It wasn't revenge I was after, it was closure. I picked it up, the weight of the papers firm in my hands. When I turned back to them, they looked uneasy, shifting like children caught in a lie. Caleb's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "What's that?" I let the envelope rest against my palm. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is what you came for. Not in the way you expected, but it's the answer you've been looking for." I stepped closer, handing it to Richard, the man who had once told me I embarrassed the family. He hesitated, then took it, his fingers trembling slightly as though the paper itself burned him. "Before you open that," I said, my tone sharp but controlled, "you need to understand something. I didn't build this life so that you could come back and pick at it like vultures. I built it because I had no other choice. You all cut me off, and you forced me to find a way to rise without you. And now that you're here, after all this time, you'll see that I don't owe you anything. Not forgiveness, not money, not even sympathy." My mother's lips parted, as though she wanted to argue, but nothing came out. Caleb glared, his jaw tense. Marissa looked down at her shoes, avoiding my eyes. I gave them one final look, my voice calm but carrying the weight of years of silence. "You wanted to see what became of the daughter, the sister, the scapegoat you abandoned? Well, here I am, and I'm not playing by your rules anymore." The tension was electric. They didn't know yet what the envelope held, but they knew, deep down, that it wasn't going to be what they wanted. And that uncertainty was more powerful than any argument I could have made. In that moment, the turning point was sealed. I had chosen composure over chaos, resolve over weakness. And as Richard slowly began to open the envelope, the path toward the climax unfolded. Richard's hands trembled as he slid his thumb beneath the seal of the envelope. The rustle of paper filled the silence, each sound sharp as a blade in the air between us. My family leaned in, eyes fixed on what they believed was their salvation, a check, perhaps, or some promise of financial rescue. I stood still, my expression unreadable, watching them the way one watches actors in a play they've already memorized. Richard unfolded the documents, his eyes scanning the words. At first, confusion clouded his face. Then realization struck, draining the color from his cheeks. He stumbled back a step, clutching the papers as though they were poison. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. Caleb snatched the pages from his hands, his arrogance faltering as he read. His eyes darted wildly over the legal terms, the signatures, the seals. His smirk collapsed, replaced by disbelief. No, this can't be real." "It's real," I said evenly, my voice carrying across the marble floor. Linda reached for the papers, her manicured hands shaking as she took them from Caleb. She scanned them, her lips quivering. "The estate, the family land, it's all in my name," I finished for her. "Every acre, every building, every corner of the estate you thought was your safety net. When your debts consumed everything else, I bought it. Quietly. Legally. Entirely." Her hand flew to her chest, clutching her necklace as though it could keep her standing. You took it from us." "No," I replied calmly. "You gave it away. You gambled, you neglected, and you let it slip through your fingers. I simply made sure it came to someone who valued it." Marissa's voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. "Amelia, you own everything." I turned my gaze to her, softer but steady. "Yes, and for the first time in my life I don't have to ask for permission to belong, because this time it belongs to me." The weight of my words hung in the air. They looked at me as though I had transformed before their eyes, not the outcast they once dismissed, but the woman holding all the power. Caleb's face twisted with rage. "You think this makes you better than us? You think owning a few deeds erases the past?" He threw the papers onto the floor, the pages scattering like fallen leaves. "You're still the same pathetic girl who begged us to let her sit at the table." I stepped closer, my heels clicking against the floor, my eyes locked on his. "You're wrong. I'm the woman who doesn't need your table anymore. I built my own. And now you're the one standing outside begging." His mouth opened, but no words came. The truth had gutted him. Linda tried again, her voice trembling, desperate. "Amelia, darling, you don't understand. This estate, it's our legacy, our family history. Without it, we have nothing." I looked at her, unflinching. "You had nothing long before I bought it. A family isn't made of bricks and land. It's made of loyalty, of love. Things you stripped away from me years ago. You didn't just cut me out of reunions. You cut me out of your hearts. And now I'm simply honoring that choice." Richard finally spoke, his voice low, defeated. "So, this is it? After all these years, this is how you repay us?" "Repay you?" I repeated, my voice firm but calm. "I owe you nothing. Not forgiveness, not money, not a second chance. All I owe myself is peace. And I intend to keep it." Marissa's tears spilled over, her voice breaking. "Amelia, please. I know we were wrong, but do you really have to shut us out forever?" I hesitated for a moment, the ghost of our childhood bond flickering inside me. Then I shook my head. "I'm not shutting you out, Marissa. You all shut me out. This is just the echo of that choice." Silence swallowed the room. My family stood pale, shaken, their illusions shattered by the weight of the documents in front of them. They had come here expecting me to be the desperate one, the fragile daughter still aching for their acceptance. Instead, they were the ones staggering, empty-handed and powerless. I opened the front door wide, my voice steady, almost gentle. "Welcome to the house you're no longer part of." The words landed like thunder, final and irrevocable. Their faces told the story. Shock, shame, fury, grief. They had built a world where I didn't belong, and now they stood at the gates of mine, realizing they no longer belonged here. Caleb stormed out first, muttering curses under his breath. Richard followed, his shoulders slumped, his pride broken. Linda lingered, her eyes glassy, before turning away. And Marissa, my sister, looked back once, her lips parted as though she wanted to say more, but no words came. She stepped out into the sunlight, tears streaking her face. And then they were gone. The door closed with a soft click, and for the first time in 15 years, I was the one who had ended the conversation. I stood in the quiet of my home, the documents scattered across the floor like remnants of a battle. Outside, I could hear the sound of a car engine starting, voices raised in muffled arguments, and then silence. They were gone. I leaned against the door for a moment, letting the weight of everything settle. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. I wasn't the trembling girl they had once silenced. I was calm, steady, grounded. But beneath that calm, there was something else, an ache I hadn't expected. I had imagined this moment countless times. For years, I thought that if they ever came crawling back, I would savor it, that I would revel in their defeat. But standing there, watching their faces pale as the truth sank in, I didn't feel triumph. I felt closure. And in a way, I felt grief. Not for them, but for the family I never truly had. I walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to see them drive away. My mother's face was turned toward the glass, her hand pressed against it as if reaching for something already lost. My father sat stiffly, staring straight ahead. Caleb gestured angrily, his mouth moving in sharp words I couldn't hear. And Marissa, she just cried, her head bowed. For a fleeting second, I almost opened the door again. Almost. But then I remembered every empty holiday, every unanswered call, every time I begged for a seat at the table and was told I wasn't welcome. I remembered how I built this life from the ashes of their rejection, and I knew that if I let them in again, the cycle would repeat. They hadn't come back for me. They had come back for what they thought I could give them. I turned away from the window, walking deeper into my home. Each step echoed with finality. I paused in the hallway where a portrait of my grandfather hung on the wall. He had been the only one who ever treated me with kindness, the only one who told me I could be more than what my family believed. When he passed, I felt like I had lost my last true ally. But now, standing before his picture, I realized that I had carried his words with me all along. "You don't need their approval, Amelia," he used to say. "You just need to know your own worth." It took me 15 years to fully understand what he meant. Worth isn't given by others. It isn't measured in invitations or in whether people choose to keep you around. Worth is something you claim for yourself, something no one can strip away once you see it clearly. That day, I didn't win by shutting the door on them. I won by finally understanding that I hadn't lost a family. I had lost people who never truly acted like one. And sometimes, that's a blessing. Later that evening, as I walked through my garden, I thought about how many people out there feel the same way I once did, rejected, invisible, desperate to be accepted by those who should love them most. I wanted them to hear my story and know this: your value is not determined by who shows up at your table. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is build your own. I know there will be people who say I should have forgiven, that I should have opened my door wider and let them back in. Maybe once I would have. But forgiveness without accountability is just permission to be hurt again. And I refuse to hand over that permission anymore. As the stars came out over the mansion, I sat on the patio, letting the night air wash over me. The house felt different now, not heavier with the ghosts of the past, but lighter, freer. This was my sanctuary, built not from their acceptance, but from my resilience. And I realized the true legacy I wanted to carry wasn't the heart estate, or the name, or the land. It was the lesson I had carved out of pain. Blood may make you related, but loyalty makes you family. So when they knocked at my door after 15 years, I didn't lose anything. They did. And for the first time, I wasn't mourning that loss. I was embracing the freedom it gave me. And that was the day I finally closed the chapter on 15 years of silence. My family came to my door expecting me to save them, but instead they left with the truth they never wanted to face. I wasn't the fragile girl they cast aside anymore. I was the woman who survived without them, who thrived despite them, and who finally understood that walking away from people who hurt you isn't cruelty. It's self-respect. If you've ever felt unwanted, invisible, or betrayed by the very people who were supposed to protect you, I hope my story shows you this. You are not defined by who rejects you. You are defined by how you rise, by how you choose to honor your own worth. Family isn't always about blood. It's about loyalty, trust, and love. And if those things are missing, you're allowed to let go. Thank you for listening to my story and for being here with me. If it spoke to you, if it made you feel seen, please like this video so more people can find it. Share it with someone who needs to hear this today. And I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell me your thoughts, your own experiences, or even just how this story made you feel. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story we bring to life. Because sometimes stories are more than entertainment. They're reminders that we're not alone,